Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Ready?
Yep. Let's go. Let's laugh. We are imperfect after all.
Okay.
Hello and welcome to the Imperfect Us podcast.
I'm Leanne Camilleri.
And I'm Lisa Downs. As hosts of the Imperfect Us podcast, we share relatable stories that celebrate we are all perfectly imperfect humans leading perfectly imperfect lives. We discover practical and evidence-based strategies that draw on the science of wellbeing and positive psychology that help us to uncover the barriers that might hold us back from being our authentic selves and turn them into opportunities so that we can show up more consistently, doing what we really aspire to do and who we want to be.
We acknowledge the Wadawurrung and the Kaurna people as traditional custodians of the beautiful lands on which this podcast is being recorded. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend this respect to other First Nations people who are here with us today. So, let's get started. Today, we are speaking with Sarah Backhouse, who is a registered architect and wellbeing specialist with a background in briefing, designing and evaluating learning environments and workplaces. Sarah's long-held interest in how architects create environments for wellbeing led her to complete a Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. And since then, she has been working at the intersection of architects, architecture, and the psychology of wellbeing. Sarah is now undertaking a PhD exploring wellbeing in the practice of architecture. We are so looking forward to learning from Sarah today. So let's dive on in. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Leanne and Lisa, thank you so much for having me on the Imperfect Us podcast. And hi to all your listeners. I'm really excited to be here. Oh, so me and wellbeing and architecture, you might be wondering. So I'm an architect by training, and I've worked in the field for over 20 years. And although architects are focused on designing and building architecture, I would like to put forward that architecture is really a social practice centered on creating great places and spaces for people. I mean, that's our ultimate objective. And I've probably been a bit of a non-conventional architect in that my work has really focused on the pre-design stages and the post-design stages of projects. So in the pre-design stages, we work with clients to understand their needs and aspirations for the future, because architecture, you're never designing for the past or today, while to get a building project off the ground. So we're always working with our clients to understand what their future looks like and how their spaces can best support them. And at the other end of projects, I then work with those clients to understand how well the built product actually is working for them. So that's it in a nutshell. And I've worked mostly on projects related to workplaces or learning environments, so larger projects of a more institutional scale. And so supporting the wellbeing of many different users becomes a really complex objective in that context. And then my deep interest in people's lived experiences of their physical environments led me to really ask myself and the profession how well we understood and supported wellbeing in architecture. And as we know, wellbeing is multidimensional, and it incorporates physical, social, and mental wellbeing. And the more I investigated, the more I saw a gap in the evidence base related to the factors that contribute to mental wellbeing in our physical environments. And after doing some postgraduate study, it's really been what I've been working on, that gap, ever since. And that's been over the last 6 years.
Oh, it sounds really, really exciting, Sarah. I think it's a field that is so broad across many different communities, I guess, and practices and individuals as well as teams, but bigger and wider communities and ecosystems. So I'm really looking forward to diving into this a little bit more.
And Sarah, you're doing a PhD in this space.
Yes. I'm looking if I'm trying to identify if there are some basic principles that can help us understand how we can best promote mental well-being in both our socio-cultural environments, that's, our workplaces and actions and behaviours, and our physical environments, to see if there are some basic factors that can be relevant to both. Now, that might be a quite highfalutin objective, but I think having some really good sort of rules of thumbs, basic sort of minimum things that we must be doing, could be really helpful for both designers and for their clients. If we say, these 3 or 4 or 5 things, the absolute bare minimums that we need to be addressing to promote well-being.
That's fantastic.
It's exciting.
That's what I'm looking at. And just for declaration, as an architect, I've decided, just out of interest, to use architects as the case study. But
who would have thought?
Hopefully the outcomes will be relevant to all.
And different voices as well, because you can have an architect, but the architects are so different individually anyway and collectively. Yes. So voices from them will be wonderful to piece together. Fantastic. Sarah, I'm actually just wondering, are you able to tell us a little bit more about the connection between well-being and architecture?
So essentially, our built environment is all around us, and understanding how it makes us feel, but also how it supports our functioning, is essential. And then if we look at places such as workplaces and learning environments that are my particular interest, we need to acknowledge that indoor environments are where, in Western countries, we spend almost 90% of our time. So getting those indoor environments right and understanding the critical factors that promote mental well-being in those environments, I just think is vital. But interestingly, much of the research related to well-being in architecture has focused on creating healthy buildings, which is fabulous and really important. So understanding how, environments free of mold or dampness, or environments with good indoor environmental qualities such as in acoustics or temperature and comfort, or environments that make us feel good through colour and material, that has been the primary focus, and that research has been vital to creating better spaces and places for all occupants. But I think the next big opportunity is to understand the factors that support mental well-being, and particularly what I'd say is the eudaimonic view of well-being. Eudaimonia being, coming from Aristotelian philosophy, and really looking at how people can reach their full potential. I think that's a really big opportunity in understanding how we design our environments, and that it's a really important topic, that one of reaching full potential, when we're talking about environments for learning and working, I think.
That's superb. And I know I'm a teacher in schools, and often we call it the third space, being in the indoor space. We've got the outdoor as well, but how do we actually cultivate a culture of learning but well-being to actually amplify their learning again, if that makes sense, and their social emotional learning, etc. And the well-being of, I guess, the architecture really does have an impact. If it's a very stale, structured thing, and it doesn't allow for that human to actually feel comfortable and safe in that space, it can really make a difference.
Absolutely. And I think also, there's been this wonderful body of research at looking at how teachers through their practice can support students in using their environments better, and acknowledging that when people feel authentic and feel comfortable and relaxed and safe, that's when they'll do their best learning. And I'm just thinking, as an example, thinking that some kids might, in a school context, learn really well sitting at a table, at a chair, but another one might read best when they're lying on the tummy on a bean bag. So to be able to design environments and have all of those opportunities for people to feel authentic in themselves and safe and content. I think it's a really great environment for learning.
And I guess we're starting to see that. Just as you were saying that, I visit, different schools in the work that I do, and I think I'm starting to notice that, the environment feels different to the traditional school environment that perhaps I was used to as a child, or even my own children who are now adults. But school does look very different and seems to be remodeled differently as well these days. Is that a fair observation?
Absolutely, Leanne. And I think really over the last 15 to 20 years, there's been a huge effort on the part of both designers, researchers, and teachers to consider how schools can be designed with beautiful settings, how students can connect to nature, how they can experience the joy of play in purposeful settings, or even have places to retreat to when experiencing, for example, sensory overload. So I think that there's a vast and growing body of really important research about that. And then if we just take the school example, I think we also need to go beyond the school building or the school gates and consider the school in its broader context. And as an example, I might say, thinking of things such as active travels, the way that kids might walk or wheel or scoot to school, the wonderful well-being opportunities that are in that journey that can also be a learning journey, because kids, as they scoot or wheel or walk, they might stop and observe nature or just get to know their local community or say hi to a neighbour. I mean, that's all about well-being as well, feeling connected, not just within your school community, but the broader community. So I think if we want to explore how physical environments promote the mental well-being of, say, a school student, but of any person in any context, we need to go beyond the interior environment to the exterior environment and to the urban environment. So there are lots of layers in that ecosystem for us to consider.
I guess the complexities and the intricacies of that, like just listening to you speak and just thinking about the experience of going to school on my bike or my scooter and the experience that's available to us, we don't think about that. Well, I don't know about other people, but I've just not crossed my mind in that way before.
Yeah, and I think, having a school-aged child has probably opened my mind to some of those opportunities. But I think my daughter feels more energized and content when she arrives at school, having had maybe that 15-minute journey and bumping into other friends, and they're all walking in the same direction. And we look at the bees buzzing over the flowers in some neighbour's front garden. That's all part of seeing ourselves as valuable parts of something bigger. It's about, as I said, curiosity. It's all a learning journey. And then we say goodbye at the school gate and off she runs in.
And it's also, isn't it a real connection of that belonging as well? Like, even though we're connected to all the things that we might see along the way, like you mentioned about the friends, you bump into people you don't know, or someone in your class, or someone else who is a buddy, who it could be anybody, but it shows you that community is really important, and that you belong to it. And I think that's really, really exciting. School is a place where you go to learn a lot of things, but there's also within your community that you learn too.
Sarah, how does the concept of wellbeing in architecture influence the design process?
Look, I think if we really want to be promoting well-being across all its dimensions, and in particular mental well-being, I think the whole design process needs to take a really people or human-centered approach. And there are many factors that influence mental well-being, as I've said, but I will say that there's a really solid evidence base that shows that the basic psychological needs of autonomy, relatedness, but let's call it belonging, because that feels more familiar, and competence are really essential nutrients across contexts and cultures. And so I think if we sort of have that lens in a design process, so we need to consider how that design process and the design outcome will support people's basic psychological needs as a bare minimum. And so through the process, I'd say this really means adopting participatory approaches that support that human-centered approach. And what do I mean by that? I mean inviting stakeholders to inform the design outcomes that affect them, that will support their sense of autonomy. Invite them to collaborate for collective benefit, that will support their sense of belonging. And invite them to share their lived experiences of what works and what doesn't, or their expertise, because that will be competence supportive. So I think that if we take that as a bare minimum for what the design process should be allowing for, it's inviting us to have the voices and be highly participatory. And through that process, then we can be asking and working with clients to then explore with them, what does well-being mean to them? Because well-being is understood by different groups and different contexts in different ways. So I don't think as a designer, I wouldn't want to be coming and saying, this is my view of well-being. I'd be wanting to start by asking, what's their view of well-being and how can their spaces best support that? Hopefully that helps.
It does. Sarah, I'm curious to know, as an architect, obviously you have that background in well-being, but when people are going through that process of becoming an architect, should they be understanding more about well-being then in that education piece?
Look, part of it is addressed in the education process, but the architectural curriculum over 5 years of university and 2 years of postgraduate training is, already jam-packed. But I think there's a really growing cohort of really empathetic, people-focused architects who understand that asking those questions is vital. And if they don't have that in-house expertise, they're great at then finding those who do, because ultimately they know for most clients, and this is whether it's someone with a house or if it's an institutional project, these are large sums of money. It's really important to invest that time up front to make sure that the aspirations, the vision for the future is really clearly understood, so that the built outcome doesn't meet expectations, but that it surpasses them. And then you don't have a client who goes, if only we had done ... but rather they're going, thanks so much for challenging me, asking me those questions 3-4 years ago. I didn't understand what you were getting at maybe then, but I really do now. So I think that's what really good architects do. And this is all part of the well-being puzzle, I think.
Yeah.
It's so funny when you talk about that. To me, I get so excited. Leanne will know as soon as I say this. It really reflects a lot of the PERMA model, in that I think of what you just said, and obviously my husband's an architect and has been doing very similar things. We're building those relationships straight away in positive emotions immediately, but even more so in that meaning and purpose space, is that to find out what is it that they really want. And to start with, they may not know, because they'd say, oh, we want this, 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 and this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and we want it at this price, and da-da-da, but I want to feel this. And all of a sudden, that's when the purpose starts to come out. What is that meaning for them? And then it's that really big, beautiful grounding invitational piece and participatory piece for the client with the architect to really then work out what's the best next steps. And I just think that's beautiful that you've raised that.
Well, I think it's lovely to hear that your husband is also working in that way, Lisa.
He's lucky he's married to me.
But those relationships are so important and so precious, and that investment in time. And yes, we can get very caught up in sort of the material outcomes and the fabric and all the regulatory frameworks that architects need to be working within.
Yeah.
But we also need to be focused on those relationships, because it's those early conversations, building that trust, being seen as the trusted advisor, and really, as I said, helping the client end up with a product that they say that surpassed.
Yeah.
Because you were asking me, you were challenging me. Maybe sometimes I felt a little bit uncomfortable because you were asking me about meaning and purpose, which for an organization, be it a workplace or a learning environment, sometimes people haven't maybe come to the architectural project thinking that they have to have all that sorted out.
Yes.
But they are really important factors to understanding what journey they're embarking on to get the outcome that will really enrich their and their occupants' lives.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much for that. And it's highlighted how important that design process is. And, you know, the invitation of the stakeholders to be part of that process. So I'm thinking, Sarah, when we consider a systems approach to wellbeing, and when I say that, you know, our listeners might not know, but at a me level, which is really the individual, then there's a we. So we have a me, we, and us. The we is the teams, and the us is really that wider ecosystem. How important are community engagement and the user feedback in designing spaces for wellbeing?
As I think I mentioned previously, I think they are absolutely essential, because they are the starting point. They're the glue. They're the catalyst. And the more open the engagement process is, yes, it can be seen as time consuming, and because it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it can be seen as difficult to navigate, because yes, it is. But that investment in time up front, and it doesn't all have to mean that design doesn't start. These things can be done in parallel, but getting that user consultation, that community engagement really helps design teams give the best response, but it also helps to start preparing the occupants for the future space. Yeah. Because they've started to not only in answering those questions about the what and the why, you know, their meaning, their purpose, the what they do, how they're going to do it in the future. They've also started to ask themselves questions about how will they use this, because, oh, this is going to be different. So it catalyzes a whole different set of conversations. And then, you know, user and community feedback can come at 2 points. One is on the design, you know, designs in progress might be presented to community groups and users. And also, you know, you can gather feedback and conduct evaluation after people have occupied the space as a learning curve. Now, that's great for a client that has multiple projects, but for one, I think you really want to invest. If it's the one project that client's doing, you really want to invest in that time and having that consultation through the user community to give yourself the best possible chance of the best possible outcome.
Thank you.
I love that. Are there any surprising findings or aha moments in the work that you've been doing and in what you're learning about wellbeing and architecture?
That's a great question, Leanne. Look, over the years, I've interviewed and lots of people and lots of clients and user groups. And recently, through my PhD research, I've been interviewing lots of architects about mental wellbeing and how both their socio-cultural and their physical environments support it. And I'd say with physical environments, these interviews have probably identified 4 main themes. First is the desire, the connection to nature, be it through physical access to nature, views of nature, or the colours and textures of nature. That's one. The second is access to a diversity of spaces to support occupant choice. The third is the ability to adapt and change physical environments in response to specific activities. That's the sort of an environmental mastery piece. And the last is the desire for settings to support social connection. And as I was looking through all of my interview data, I started to go, okay, you know, we've got this concept of biophilia here. For me, that was no surprise, because the biophilia hypothesis says we have an innate connection to nature and want to connect with it. But for me, I think I was surprised, and it was a bit of a aha moment, to see that the other three themes really did align with the basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. And this was a big aha moment for me, as this particular wellbeing theory is really understudied in relation to architecture. Yet all you need to do is sit down and talk to users, occupants, and it starts to come out. And then I thought, well, maybe it was just because people weren't aware of the theory and didn't see the alignment. But for me, that's been really interesting, and therefore I think it holds a lot of promise, certainly in my PhD research, for understanding what some basic principles for promoting mental well-being in both sociocultural environments and physical environments might look like. And so in a way, you know, one could say that the basic psychological needs might offer designers and clients, or, you know, some high order principles that we might think of as rules of thumb, you know, designing for choice and diversity supports autonomy, designing for adaptability supports sense of competence, and designing for belonging supports relatedness. I mean, really easy, it might sound, but sometimes a little bit overlooked. Sometimes we need to just look at the nose that's in the middle of our face.
Yeah. And sometimes it's like a little checklist, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, being human, that there are all those things are definitely what make a fantastic human, you know, flourish a little bit more. And just sometimes we miss some of those things. You might go out in nature, for example, and that fills our bucket, but we forget about the connectedness or the relatedness. A whole lot of things that sometimes we just drop off.
Absolutely. And you know, those high order principles, I think that they then help designers and clients think, okay, well, there are a whole lot of interventions, design strategies we can employ that might tick off those boxes. But if we're saying, for example, that we need to offer diversity of settings to support choice, or diversity of sensory experience to support choice, it means we can't just say, okay, biophilia is going to do everything, because there'll be other things we need to consider. So it's just to always say, think of that variety that we need to be designing for.
I really love how it inspires the thinking, not being from that background. I know I don't understand a lot about it, but with what you've just been saying, I think perhaps the concepts of well-being is there in conversations that you have. It's just the blinders are on, and that connection to understand that hasn't been there. So in the work that you're doing, it seems like it's waking people up and putting it on the table, if you like, and, you know, hey, here's the connection.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, Leanne. I think it's probably making the implicit explicit. That's probably more what it is.
Yeah.
Because people have the conversations. It's not that they're not had. But yes, it's sometimes lots of interventions and lots of design strategies are employed that do lots of wonderful things. And just maybe the direct connection to wellbeing hasn't been made. So sometimes it's just about repackaging or recontextualizing, or creating new links between existing literature or existing design approaches. So, yeah.
Sarah, in the light of today's conversation, is there a book or a podcast or TED Talk that you would recommend that might be of value to our listeners today?
Look, on my bedside table, I have two books. One is by Ruth Allen, and it's called Grounded: How Connection with Nature Can Improve Our Mental and Physical Wellbeing. So this sort of links in with what I was saying earlier about biophilia. And what I have really enjoyed about this particular book is it's full of really practical and mindful activities to help us disconnect from technology and reconnect with nature. And so it's really been filling my bucket, as it were.
Lovely.
And the other book that I'm really only at the beginning of is by sociologist Corey Keyes, and it's called Languishing: How to Feel Alive Again in a World That Wears Us Down.
Mm.
And I think Keyes' perspective is so important because he encourages the reader to shift their focus from feeling good or happiness to functioning well and reaching people's potential, that eudaimonia piece. And I think that shift in perspective is so important when we're considering enduring well-being. And then as a third piece, look, if listeners are interested in an ecological view of schools and well-being, they might be interested in the book Schools as Community Hubs, Building More and a School for Community Benefit. That came out of some research I've worked on at Melbourne University with my wonderful colleagues there, Associate Professor Ben Cleveland, Janet Clinton, Ian McShane, Philippa Chandler, and Ruth Aston. And the book explores how schools can engage with their communities in various ways, the benefits and the current barriers and strategies to overcome them. So, as an editor, I think it would capture such diverse perspectives from principals and community partnership brokers through to architects and urban designers. And the bonus is the book's online at no cost. So there you go.
We love that.
That's awesome.
Thank you so much for sharing. They're amazing books. I want to go out and get grounded straight away. I keep hearing about that and I've had it on my list for a long time, but I now need to purchase it.
And I have Languishing as my next book, so maybe we can swap notes. Thank you so much, Sarah. Sarah, one of the things that we ask all of our guests is to share a current wellbeing practice that they're doing that we can share with our listeners and they can add to their wellbeing toolkit. And we're really curious to know, what's your current wellbeing practice at the moment?
Oh, look, I've dabbled in many, and maybe this is an obvious one because lots of people did it during the pandemic, but my go-to, and it remains my go-to, is mindful walking. So as a practice, mindful walking invites me to be actively engaged in the present moment with each step I take, and connecting with my breath and the sensations of my body as my feet hit the pavement, and watching the environment around me. And I go on mindful walks for about 30 to 60 minutes, and I use them as sort of a circuit breaker from the mental chatter that's going on in my head. And to be honest, it can be really noisy in there at times.
I don't think you're alone.
So when I'm out walking, and people can Google, your listeners can Google mindful walking to sort of get some strategies. But what I do is when I'm walking, I consciously focus on my senses of sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste. That's what I'm going out doing. And when I find my mind slipping back to the grocery list or the work tasks or whatever I've got to be doing, I work on bringing myself back to the present moment by finding a hook in my physical environment, something to focus on, such as, the changes of the autumn colours, or the dapple of light on the grass, or a swan that's just flown in over the river, or the rhythm of my breathing, or some interesting buildings, because, hey, I'm an architect and I love checking out architecture on my walks. And I'll be honest and say mindful walking was not an instant success for me on day one. I had to work at it very hard, and be really, really intentional. But now I find it just such an essential bit of mental nourishment that I really miss it when I don't do it.
Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Sarah. The way you just articulated that, I want to go for a beautiful walk and see that dappling light and the birds and test out my senses. So thank you so much.
My pleasure.
That's one of my favourites too. We're coming towards the end of our conversation. If people would love to connect with you, Sarah, and learn more about the work that you're doing, where would they find out about you?
So I, as part of my other wellbeing practices, I will say I'm not largely represented on social media. However, I am on LinkedIn, so people can find me there as Sarah Backhouse. You can find me via my website, which is thewellbeingarchitect.com.au. Or if you want to know more about what I'm doing with my great colleagues at Melbourne Uni, you can check out the Learning Environments Applied Research Network at the University of Melbourne, and you'll find a vast range of resources that look at the connections between learning spaces and their users. And, there's an implicit and sometimes explicit connection to wellbeing in that body of work as well.
Thank you so much. We'll be sure to put these in our show notes as well.
Sarah, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's been my absolute pleasure, Lan and Lisa. Thanks.
How wonderful was that conversation with Sarah?
And I was a bit nervous about this conversation, to be really honest, because I thought, I don't know anything about architecture, and I was concerned about how I would understand and talk about these things. But there is such a big connection to wellbeing. I was really, really surprised. And I think one of the things that she talked about early in the piece was that the three spaces that they focus on around the physical, social, and mental. I thought, oh yeah, once we started talking about that, I said, yes, it was a bit of an aha moment for me. How about you?
I love that piece as well, and that intersection between those three areas. So like almost concentric circles, the three of them together, where you have the architect, the architecture, and the mental wellbeing. So that psychological wellbeing really to explore, because ultimately the architect is part of the process to create the architecture that clients, whether it's an organisation or an individual, whatever it might be, but also the well-being part of it. Like, how is that architecture, how is the architect and the clients working together to really build what they really need to promote positive and, I guess, impactful well-being. I think that was just so brilliant. So I can't wait to hear her research as that evolves.
Yeah.
And I think when she talked about the built architecture, about the functionality, but also the feeling of it, she talked about in a lot of the research that indoor environments, we spend 90%, most of us spend 90%, I cannot believe, time at work indoors.
Yeah.
So we've got to get those environments right for everyone. And we know that everyone is not the same. So we've got to make sure that the wellbeing of our individuals within that context is actually going to be promoting wellbeing.
Yeah. When you think about the environments that we are in and how that impacts how we feel about things or inspires, inspiration, even that different thinking.
Absolutely.
I know I feel different when I'm stuck inside four walls as opposed to having a window and being able to see outside and contemplate and draw on whatever that is.
Well, for me, it's sitting. Sitting, I just, I can't stand sitting. My body's not meant to do that. I'm meant to move. So for me, when I am sitting to do something for a long time, I struggle. My wellbeing just dips really low.
Yeah. I liked the 4 points that she made in and the linking of architecture and well-being, and that desire to have that connection to nature, a diversity of spaces, an ability to adapt and change to environments, and having this settings to influence connection. I think that's wellbeing in a nutshell, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. Again, we're trying to be human-centered, centered or human-centered, however we want to describe that. But when you have a desire to be connected to nature, that's when you get access to all the colours and things that you might need. So I know for myself, when we talk about in school environments, often they'll do things like bright red and yellow and blue, like the old school sort of primary colours. Now when you walk into a lot of learning spaces, it's much calmer and different hues that actually connect to the environment that they actually live in, indoor and outdoor. And you can bring in outdoor things inside that actually make it look like it's just one transition. But I also really love that she highlighted the importance in a design process, that it's such a valuable piece to invite all the stakeholders into the conversation early. So mapping out what people really need and what they see, but also for the architect to be able to challenge the client. Because sometimes as clients, you just think, oh, I just want this, 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 and this. But then you can be in a process where they can open your mind to different ideas, which will still marry to you, and potentially the possibilities of a better outcome may emerge. And I think having everybody together helps that process.
It's that appreciative inquiry approach, isn't it?
And generative, really generative.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know.
No, you don't know what you don't know, do you? I did not know. I did not know anything about architecture until today. So I am really feeling like I've learned something today.
It's such a wonderful conversation with Sarah, and I can't wait to hear more about the research that she's doing and perhaps the impact that might have.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Have a great day, everyone.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye.
And thank you for listening to the Imperfect Us podcast. As always, we are extremely grateful to our executive producer, Brenton Ainsworth, for helping us to put this episode together. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please share it with someone you care about, and we would be grateful if you could rate this podcast on iTunes. To continue the conversation and see what we're up to, you can connect with us on LinkedIn. Just search for Imperfect Us. Bye for now.